"It's time to be realistic, Dad," my daughter said, her voice laced with a false, gentle pity that made my skin crawl. She slid the document across my own dining room table, a legal chain that would grant her control of my life's work. "The doctors say you're confused." So I signed it because they had forgotten one crucial thing. I'm the chemist who wrote the book on drugs like this, and I already had the proof that would ruin them. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The fog was the worst part. It rolled in without warning, a thick gray blanket settling over my thoughts. One moment I'd be reading the morning paper, and the next I'd find myself staring at the same paragraph, the words having melted into an indecipherable soup. Names of old friends, simple appointments, the plot of a movie I'd seen the night before. They would all float just beyond my reach, tantalizingly close but impossible to grasp. This wasn't the gentle, occasional forgetfulness of a man approaching 60. This felt chemical. It felt wrong. My daughter, Clara, sat opposite me at the heavy oak table my late wife, Helen, and I had picked out decades ago. The table had hosted countless family dinners, birthday celebrations, and tearful heart-to-hearts. Now, it was the stage for a quiet, devastating coup. Clara's face was a mask of earnest concern, her brow furrowed in just the right way, her eyes soft with what she wanted me to believe was sympathy. But I saw the flicker of something else beneath it, the nervous, brittle tension of a person playing a role they hadn't quite memorized. "Dad, please," she urged, her manicured finger tapping the crisp stack of papers. "This is just a formality. It's to help you, to make sure your bills are paid on time and everything is managed properly. You know how you've been forgetting things lately." Her words were meant to be kind, but they landed like stones. Forgetting things. Yes, I had been. Ever since my son-in-law, Dr. Julian Croft, had taken over my medical care after my minor dizzy spell 2 months ago. He had clucked his tongue, called it a warning sign for a man of your age, and prescribed a new, cutting-edge medication to manage my blood pressure. A medication, he had assured me with a gleaming, confident smile, that was the gold standard. The document was a durable power of attorney. It wasn't a formality, it was an abdication. It would give Clara, and by extension her husband, complete authority over my finances, my property, my entire life. They could sell this house, liquidate the portfolio I had spent 40 years building as a pharmaceutical chemist, and place me in whatever facility they deemed appropriate. I looked at my daughter's face, searching for a trace of the little girl who used to run to me with scraped knees, the teenager I taught how to drive, the young woman I had walked down the aisle. I saw only the faint reflection of Julian's ambition in her eyes. He was the one speaking through her, using her as his perfectly loving, perfectly believable puppet. My hand felt heavy, disconnected from my arm as I reached for the pen. The fog was pressing in, a dull headache forming behind my eyes. This was the effect of the morning dose. Julian had been so insistent on the dosage schedule. "Consistency is key for cognitive stability, Stephen," he'd said, his voice smooth as silk. I looked at the signature line, my own name, Stephen Vance. It felt like someone else's. With a deep, shaky breath that was only partially an act, I uncapped the pen. Clara's posture relaxed ever so slightly. She thought she had won. She thought her father was a confused old man, fading into the twilight of his life, helpless and in need of her care. She saw a victim. She had no idea she was looking at a predator who was merely biding his time. I scrawled my name. The ink was a dark, definitive black. I pushed the papers back across the table. Her relief was palpable, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, gathering the pages as if they were a precious artifact. "You've done the right thing." I simply nodded, my mind clinging to a single, sharp thought that cut through the manufactured haze. They thought my mind was failing, that my confusion was a product of age and illness. They were wrong. The betrayal was not the document I had just signed. The betrayal was the poison they were feeding me every morning, disguised as medicine. and that was a betrayal worse than any diagnosis. Clara left soon after, clutching the papers to her chest like a winning lottery ticket. The click of the front door echoed in the sudden silence of the house. For a long moment, I just sat at the table, the ghost of my signature seeming to mock me from the indentation on the wood. The manufactured fog was already beginning to recede, a process I had become intimately familiar with over the past 3 weeks. It had started subtly. A week into my new prescription from Julian, I found myself struggling to recall the name of a key compound I had helped synthesize in the late 90s. It was like trying to catch smoke. The frustration was immense. At first, I chalked it up to stress, to the health scare that had landed me in Julian's care. But then it happened again and again. I misplaced my keys. I forgot a lunch appointment with my lawyer and old friend, Robert Miller. I would stand in the middle of a room, completely blank as to why I had entered it. Julian had been so reassuring. "These are classic signs, Stephen," he'd said during a follow-up, his hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture that felt more proprietary than comforting. "The cognitive side of aging can be abrupt. We just need to monitor it." But I wasn't just any aging man. I was a pharmaceutical chemist. I had spent my life in labs, understanding the intricate dance of molecules and their effects on the human body. My suspicion was a finely honed instrument, and it was screaming that something was wrong. So 3 weeks ago, I had made a decision. After taking my morning pill, I carefully collected the next one from the bottle. I sealed it in a sterile sample bag and sent it via courier to a former colleague who now ran one of the most advanced private analytical labs in the country. Then, I went to my own home laboratory, a small, pristine setup in my basement, and created a batch of placebos, identical capsules filled with nothing more than cornstarch. The next morning, I began my new secret regimen. The real pill went into a hidden container and the placebo went down my throat. The first 2 days were hell. The withdrawal from whatever Julian had prescribed was potent, leaving me with splitting headaches and a tremor in my hands. But by the third day, the fog began to lift. It was like a sunrise inside my own mind. Thoughts became crisp again. Memories snapped back into focus. The world returned to its sharp, clear resolution. Now, sitting in the quiet house, I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. The phone rang, piercing the silence. It was Clara. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "I'm all right, sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone level, slightly weary. "A bit tired is all." "See, this is why we did this," she said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. Julian was there with her, coaching her. "Now you don't have to worry about a thing. Julian is going to help me set up the accounts tomorrow. He's so good at this stuff." "That's good," I mumbled, playing the part. "He says the first step is to consolidate your portfolio. It's too scattered, makes it hard to manage," she continued, parroting lines that were clearly not her own. "He thinks we should move it into a more stable, long-term growth fund. Less for you to think about." They were moving fast. Of course they were. "Whatever you and Julian think is best, dear," I said softly. A pause, then, "I love you, Dad." The words, once a source of pure joy, now felt like another tool in their arsenal. "I love you too, Clara." I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. The man looking back at me was tired, his face etched with the lines of grief and worry, but his eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a scientist who had just isolated a problem and was now designing the protocol to solve it. They had lied to me, manipulated me, and tried to steal my mind before they stole my money. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was. My life had been built on precision, on the unwavering logic of chemistry. After my wife Helen passed away from cancer 15 years ago, that precision became my anchor. It was what allowed me to work a demanding job, overseeing multi-million-dollar research projects, while still managing to raise a teenage daughter on my own. Clara was my world. Every late night in the lab, every business trip I had to take was for her. I wanted to build a foundation so solid that she would never have to worry, never have to struggle the way I did in my early years. I paid for her college education, her master's degree, her first car. When she met Julian, I was overjoyed. He was a doctor, after all. Handsome, ambitious, and utterly charming. He said all the right things, treated Clara like a queen, and spoke to me with a deference that I, in my naivete, mistook for respect. I paid for their lavish wedding, seeing it as an investment in my daughter's happiness. I gave them the down payment for their sprawling house in the suburbs, the kind of house where they could raise a family. My family. The first red flag, so small I barely registered it at the time, appeared about a year ago. We were having dinner and Julian, after a glass or two of the expensive wine I'd bought, started asking questions about my retirement portfolio. It wasn't overt, just small, probing inquiries dressed up as casual interest. I'm always fascinated by how people in other fields plan for the future, Stephen, he'd said, swirling the Merlot in his glass. A man with your career must have made some very shrewd investments. I gave him a vague, polite answer and the conversation moved on. But the question lingered. It felt acquisitive. Clara, besotted with him, noticed nothing. She just beamed, proud that her brilliant husband was taking an interest in her brilliant father. The antagonist, Dr. Julian Croft, was a masterpiece of polished deception. He was tall, with a mane of perfectly coiffed dark hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His professional demeanor was flawless, a carefully constructed blend of authority and empathy that made his patients, especially his older, more vulnerable ones, trust him implicitly. He specialized in geriatrics, a field he once told me was the future of medicine, a comment that now felt chillingly opportunistic. When I had my dizzy spell, Clara insisted he take over my case. He's the best, Dad. I'd feel so much better knowing you're in his hands. How could I refuse? It would have seemed churlish, paranoid. At my first consultation in his private clinic, the decor itself was part of the performance. Muted colors, expensive modern art, a receptionist who spoke in hushed, reverent tones. It was all designed to project an aura of serene, unassailable competence. Julian sat behind a large mahogany desk, my chart open before him, though he barely glanced at it. Stephen, he began, leaning forward, his voice a low, confidential murmur. We need to be proactive. At your age, a small event like this can be the first domino to fall. I want to put you on a new regimen. It's a combination therapy, very effective. It will keep your vitals stable and, as a bonus, has been shown to protect cognitive function. He slid a prescription slip across the desk. I glanced at the name of the drug. It was a newer beta blocker, but it was combined with a secondary component I wasn't immediately familiar with from a clinical standpoint, though the name rang a distant bell from my research days. It wasn't a common choice. Are you sure about this one, Julian? I had asked, my chemist's curiosity piqued. My understanding is that a simple diuretic is usually the first line of defense for mild hypertension. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. The guidelines are always evolving, Stephen. We're moving towards more holistic, preventative treatments now. Trust me, he said, tapping the prescription pad. I'm the doctor. That phrase, trust me, I'm the doctor, became his mantra. It was the shield he used to deflect any question, the velvet-gloved hand that pushed me towards the path he had chosen for me. He was counting on that authority, on my love for my daughter, and on the creeping fear of mortality that every man my age feels. He was counting on me being a patient, not a scientist. That was his first and most critical miscalculation. The shift from passive victim to active strategist happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks and 1 day before I signed the power of attorney. I woke up feeling clear, the effects of the previous day's real pill having worn off during the night. I went to the kitchen to take my morning dose and paused, the capsule in my palm. The label on the bottle was pristine, the instructions simple. Yet, a deep, instinctual alarm was ringing in my mind. The fog that descended after I took it was too thick, too specific. It didn't feel like a side effect. It felt like the intended effect. I walked past the kitchen and went down into my basement lab. It was my sanctuary, a place of order and logic. I calibrated my digital scale, carefully opened a fresh capsule from Julian's prescription, and weighed the contents. Then, I began a series of preliminary solubility tests in different reagents. The primary beta blocker component dissolved as expected, but the secondary compound was behaving oddly. It was far more potent and had psychoactive properties that, while documented in obscure research papers, were certainly not approved for a common blood pressure medication. It was known to induce confusion, short-term memory loss, and a sense of detachment. It was, in essence, a gaslighting agent in pill form. My blood ran cold. This wasn't malpractice. This was a deliberate, calculated assault. My hands, which had been trembling with a manufactured frailty for weeks, were now steady with cold fury. I immediately created the first batch of placebo pills. Then, I called Robert Miller. "Rob, it's Stephen," I said, my voice low. "I need to see you, today, and I need you to be my lawyer, not my friend." Robert's voice sharpened with concern. "What's going on, Steve? You missed our lunch last week. I was worried." "I know, and I'll explain everything, but not over the phone. Your office, 1 hour." In the sterile quiet of Robert's downtown office, I laid it all out. The prescription from Julian, the unnatural cognitive fog, my suspicions. Robert, a man who had seen the absolute worst of human nature in his 30 years of practicing law, listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled. "So you think your son-in-law, a respected physician, is deliberately drugging you to make you seem incompetent so he and your daughter can take control of your assets?" "I don't think it, Rob. I know it." "This is a serious accusation, Stephen. We need more than a hunch. We need irrefutable proof." "I'm already working on it," I said, pulling the sealed sample bag from my briefcase. "I sent this to Dr. Aris Thorne at GenLab this morning. If anyone can give us a full workup and a legally admissible report, it's him. I want a full quantitative and qualitative analysis." Robert's eyes lit up with a glint of predatory excitement. This was the kind of fight he lived for. "Good, that's very good. While we wait for that, we play dumb. You are a confused, frightened old man. You are leaning on your daughter. You trust your son-in-law implicitly. You let them walk right into the trap. Give them all the rope they need." "They're already asking me to sign a power of attorney," I said. "Perfect," Robert breathed. "We let them. We'll have the signing witnessed under very specific conditions. We'll document your state of mind before and after. We'll build a case so airtight that by the time we're done, Julian Croft won't be able to practice medicine on a houseplant." The investigation began in earnest. While I played the part of the declining patriarch, Robert initiated a discreet but thorough background check on Dr. Julian Croft. He hired a private investigator, a former detective with a knack for digging up buried secrets. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. The bait was the very thing they craved most, my signature on a piece of paper. For the next 3 weeks I lived a double life. In front of Clara and Julian I was fading, my mind a tangled mess. But alone my mind was a razor, honing itself for the coming confrontation. The fog was no longer my prison, it was my camouflage. 2 days after I signed the papers, with my mind sharp and clear from the placebos, I decided it was time to test the waters. It was time to introduce the first variable into their neat and tidy experiment. I called Clara. "Hi, Dad, is everything okay?" she asked. The false concern in her voice was starting to fray around the edges, replaced by a thin veneer of impatience. She was busy now, managing my life. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just had a question and it's been bothering me," I said, injecting a note of befuddlement into my tone. "I was looking at my prescription bottle and I couldn't quite make out the name of that second medicine Julian has me on. The one for my, you know." Silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the panicked search for an answer she didn't have. Julian had fed her a narrative, not a detailed script. "Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, Dad," she stammered. "It's just the cognitive support part of the medication. It's very technical." "I see," I said, feigning confusion. "It's just it feels so strong. I was reading online. I know Julian told me not to, but I can't help myself. And some of these newer drugs can have very powerful side effects. I thought it might have been Memixil or maybe Claritrol." I threw out two names of drugs I knew were used for advanced Alzheimer's, not mild hypertension. The panic in her voice was now unmistakable. "Dad, stop. You're just going to worry yourself. Julian knows what he's doing. He's the doctor. We trust him, remember." "Of course, dear, of course. It was a silly question," I said, backing down. "Don't you worry about it. I'll just take my pills like a good boy." I hung up, a grim smile on my face. The seed was planted. I knew Clara would go straight to Julian with my questions. And I knew how a man like Julian would react to his perfect plan being questioned, even by a confused old man. He would get angry. He would get defensive. And that defensiveness would be the first crack in the foundation of Clara's trust. That evening, Julian himself called me. The mask of the caring son-in-law had slipped. His voice was cold, sharp, and laced with irritation. "Stephen, Clara tells me you've been researching your medication," he said, the word researching dripping with condescension. "Just a little curious, Julian. Old habits from my chemistry days," I said mildly. "Well, I need you to stop. Immediately," he snapped. "You are not a clinician. You are a patient. Your amateur analysis is counterproductive and, frankly, a sign of the exact cognitive fixation we're trying to treat. You are agitating yourself and upsetting Clara for no reason. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I said meekly. "Good, stick to the plan, Stephen. It's for your own good," he said, and hung up without saying goodbye. The call was a gift. He had revealed his true nature, arrogant, controlling, and dismissive. He wasn't caring for me, he was managing an asset. The next morning, Robert called. "The report from GenLab is in," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "It's worse than we thought, Steve. The secondary compound isn't just inappropriate, it's a research chemical. It was never submitted for FDA approval for this kind of application. It's been linked in preliminary animal studies to inducing symptoms that mimic rapid-onset dementia. He wasn't just using an off-label drug, he was using me as his personal lab rat. There's no way he could have prescribed this by accident. It's deliberate, it's criminal." The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. "And there's more," Robert continued. "My investigator looked into Julian's history. 2 years ago, an elderly, wealthy patient of his died suddenly. The patient had amended his will just a month prior, leaving a significant token of appreciation to a charitable foundation for geriatric research. Turns out, Julian is the sole director of that foundation. The family suspected foul play but couldn't prove anything. The case was closed." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't his first time. I was just the next mark, and a much more personal one. "It's time, Rob," I said, my voice low and hard as steel. "It's time to bring this to an end." With the lab report and the investigator's findings in hand, Robert and I knew we had to isolate Clara from Julian's influence. She was the key. She was both a victim and an unwilling accomplice, and for any real justice to be found, she needed to see the truth with her own eyes. Julian, spooked by my questions, began to tighten his grip. He started screening my calls, telling friends who phoned that I was resting and not up for visitors. He informed me that he'd scheduled a formal cognitive assessment for me with a specialist colleague of his, a move designed to get a fraudulent diagnosis into my official medical records. The walls were closing in, and they were moving faster than ever to liquidate my assets. Robert's contact at my brokerage firm confirmed that Julian and Clara had already filed the paperwork to begin transferring my portfolio into a new account under their control. We had to act. I called Clara and, using the most pathetic, broken voice I could muster, told her I was frightened. I had a bad night, sweetheart, I whispered into the phone when I finally got her alone. The fog. It was so thick. I didn't know where I was. I need to see you. Please, just you. It worked. The daughter in her overrode the puppeteer's instructions. She agreed to come over that afternoon, telling me she would tell Julian she was just running errands. She arrived looking stressed, her face pale. I sat her down at the oak table, a cup of tea in her hands. I didn't start with accusations. I started with love. Clara, I began, my voice filled with genuine emotion. You are the most important person in the world to me. Everything I have ever done has been for you. Do you believe that? Tears welled in her eyes. Of course I do, Dad. Then I need you to look at this, I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't the damning lab report. Not yet. It was a copy of my late wife's will. I had my finger on a single clause Helen had insisted on including. It stipulated that a portion of our estate was to be placed in a trust for our future grandchildren, a trust that I was forbidden from dissolving. Your mother wanted to make sure our family was always protected, I said softly. Last week, your husband advised you to consolidate my portfolio. One of the assets he specifically told you to liquidate was the one that funds this trust. He wanted to dissolve it. Why do you think he would do that? Clara stared at the page, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He said it was underperforming. He said it was just old paperwork. He lied, I said simply. He told you to illegally break a trust your mother created for her grandchildren, for your children. This was a blow she couldn't parry. It wasn't about complex finance or medicine. It was about her mother. It was about family. The first true crack appeared in her certainty. I don't understand, she stammered. I know, I said gently, and that's why you need to see this. This time I gave her the full report from GenLab. I watched her face as she read it. I saw confusion morph into disbelief, then into dawning horror. The technical jargon was dense, but the conclusion, which Robert had made sure was written in clear, unambiguous English, was inescapable. The prescribed medication contains a research-grade chemical compound not approved for human use, known to cause severe cognitive impairment, memory loss, and confusion. She looked up from the paper, her face ashen. No, she whispered. No, this has to be a mistake, a lab error. Is it a mistake, Clara? I asked, my voice hardening slightly as I slid the private investigator's report across the table next. Is it a mistake that his last wealthy patient also died shortly after changing his will to benefit a foundation Julian controls? Is it a mistake that he has been systematically trying to isolate me from my friends and my lawyer? She was trembling now, the papers shaking in her hand. The truth was an avalanche, and she was right in its path. All the little things, Julian's strange insistence, his coldness, his dismissal of her own concerns, were suddenly cast in a new, sinister light. He told me we were helping you, she sobbed, the words choked with guilt and anguish. He said you were getting sick and that people would try to take advantage of you. He said we had to protect you. He was talking about himself, I said, my heart aching for her pain even now. I reached across the table and took her hand. He used your love for me as a weapon against us both, but it's not too late. We can stop him, but you have to be strong. She looked at me, her eyes streaming with tears, but for the first time in months I saw my daughter again. The real Clara, not the puppet. Her grief was hardening into a resolve that I knew would match my own. The spell was broken. The final showdown was set for Friday at 2:00 p.m. The stage was Robert Miller's conference room, a place of intimidating mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Robert had arranged the meeting under the official guise of finalizing the asset transfer. He had invited Julian and Clara, along with a senior representative from my investment bank, a man named Mr. Davies, who was in on the entire situation. Unbeknownst to Julian, Robert had also invited another guest, a quiet, unassuming woman from the State Medical Board's investigative division, who was introduced simply as a paralegal from our office. Julian strode in like a conquering hero, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, the very picture of success. Clara walked beside him, her face a pale, neutral mask. She played her part perfectly, nodding quietly as Julian greeted everyone, her hand resting nervously on her purse. I gave her a small, imperceptible nod. She was ready. "Well, let's get this finalized," Julian said, taking a seat at the head of the table as if it were his right. "I've reviewed the transfer documents and they seem to be in order. We can have this wrapped up quickly." "Of course," Robert said smoothly, taking his seat opposite him. "But before we sign the final papers, Mr. Vance has a statement he'd like to make, for the record." Julian's smile faltered. He shot me a look of pure annoyance. "Stephen, that's not necessary. This is a simple administrative." "I insist," I said, my voice clear and strong. It was the first time in months he had heard me speak without the manufactured haze of confusion, and the effect was immediate. He sat up straighter, a flicker of alarm in his eyes. I took a breath and began, my gaze locked on his. "For the past 2 months, I have been under the care of my son-in-law, Dr. Julian Croft, for a minor hypertensive condition. During that time, my cognitive state appeared to decline dramatically. I became forgetful, confused, and detached. It was based on this decline that I was persuaded to sign over power of attorney." I paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. "However," I continued, "my confusion was not a result of aging or illness. It was a direct result of the medication Dr. Croft prescribed for me." I slid a copy of the GenLab report across the table. "This is a full chemical analysis of the pills Dr. Croft prescribed. It was conducted by one of the top independent labs in the country. It confirms the presence of a research chemical specifically known to induce the exact symptoms I was experiencing. A chemical, I might add, that has never been approved for use in humans." Julian's face went white. He stared at the report as if it were a viper. "This is absurd," he sputtered, looking around the table for support. "This is a fabrication. He's a confused old man, he's paranoid." "Am I?" I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. I slid the second report across the table. "Is this also a fabrication? It's a report from a private investigator detailing your relationship with your former patient, Mr. Albright. It details his sudden death just 1 month after amending his will to leave a substantial sum to a foundation of which you are the sole director." Julian shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This meeting is over. I will not sit here and be slandered by a senile." "Sit down, Dr. Croft," the paralegal from the medical board said, her voice quiet but ringing with authority. She opened her portfolio and produced her official credentials. "My name is Ms. Evans. I'm the lead investigator for the State Licensing Board, and right now, you are the subject of a formal investigation into gross malpractice, patient endangerment, and potential fraud. I would advise you to remain seated." Julian froze, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted to Clara, his last hope. "Clara, tell them," he pleaded. "Tell them this is ridiculous. Tell them how worried we were about him." Clara stood up slowly, her gaze fixed on her husband. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the manipulation he had put her through was crystallized in that one look. She opened her purse and took out a small, digital audio recorder, placing it on the table. "I will tell them, Julian," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I'll tell them about our phone call last night." She pressed play. Julian's voice, cold and vicious, filled the silent room. "I don't care what he thinks he's found. The man is legally incompetent. The papers are signed. Once the assets are moved, it's over. We put him in a nice, quiet facility where he can't talk to anyone and we get on with our lives." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. The color drained completely from Julian's face. He looked from the recorder to Clara's resolute face, to my cold stare, to the impassive eyes of the investigator. He was trapped, utterly and completely. He collapsed back into his chair, a broken man. The performance was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Julian's downfall was as spectacular as his ambition had been. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the lab report, the private investigator's findings, and the damning audio recording provided by his own wife, he had no defense. Ms. Evans and the medical board immediately suspended his license pending a full hearing, which was a mere formality. Robert, on my behalf, filed a multi-million-dollar civil suit for medical malpractice, fraud, and endangerment. The district attorney's office, alerted by the board, opened a criminal investigation not only into my case, but also into the suspicious death of his former patient. Julian Croft, the man who saw vulnerable seniors as his personal retirement plan, was facing total ruin. But for me, the victory was not in his destruction. It was in the quiet moments that followed. A week after the meeting, Clara came to my house alone. We sat at that same oak table, but the atmosphere was no longer one of tension and deceit. It was filled with a heavy, sorrowful peace. She cried for a long time, and I just sat with her, my hand on her shoulder. Her apologies were raw and heartfelt, choked with a shame so deep it was painful to witness. "I should have known, Dad," she wept. "I should have seen who he was. I let him twist my love for you into this. I'm so sorry." "He was a master manipulator, Clara," I told her, my own eyes wet with tears. "He fooled a lot of people. He fooled me for a while. He preyed on your best quality, your love. That is his sin, not yours." There was no single moment of forgiveness, but rather a slow, gentle rebuilding. We talked for hours, not just about Julian, but about her mother, about her childhood, about the future. For the first time, I told her about my work, not just the successes, but the principles behind it, the sacred trust between a scientist and the people whose lives are affected by their work. It was a trust Julian had shattered, and in our conversation, we began to piece together our own. Clara filed for divorce immediately. She testified against Julian in his hearings, her voice clear and strong. She dedicated herself to untangling the legal and financial mess he had created, working tirelessly with Robert to ensure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. She was no longer a puppet. She was my partner. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice, and more importantly, prevention. Using a portion of the funds recovered in the civil suit, I established a foundation in my late wife's name, the Helen Vance Foundation for Patient Advocacy. Its mission is to provide legal aid and investigative resources for elderly individuals who suspect they are victims of medical or financial abuse. Robert sits on the board, and Clara is its executive director. She has found a new purpose, forged in the fires of her own painful experience. The fog in my mind is long gone, replaced by a clarity I cherish every day. My life is my own again. The house is quiet, but it is a peaceful quiet now. Sometimes Clara and I will sit at the old oak table, going over case files for the foundation, and I will look at her, my strong, resilient, brilliant daughter, and I know that we have survived. We took the poison they fed us and turned it into tea. He cure, and that is a resolution more satisfying than any victory in a courtroom.